Thank you very much. I appreciate that, particularly since you're all still full of lunch. All right, our panel, which we are starting a little bit late, and excuse us for that. As Greg mentioned, the future of utility-scale renewable energy in California. As all of you are likely aware, the state of California has mandated 33% of our energy come from renewable sources by 2020. And in an effort to achieve this, utility-scale renewable energy developments are planned throughout Southern California. And though such developments continue to confront significant siting and permitting challenges, we have a convened panel here today to address a variety of questions related to this topic, as well as we'll ensure to leave some time to address your questions as well. And in the interest of both time and accuracy, I'm going to have the panel members introduce themselves, starting with Mike Peevey.
Hi, is this working? Yeah. Well, I'm Mike Peevey. I'm the president of the California Public Utilities Commission, and I have been, this is my 9th year as president. I was originally appointed by Governor Gray Davis, then Arnold Schwarzenegger, and now Governor Brown kept me in there. So I must be doing something either right or wrong, depending on your perspective. But at any rate, the Public Utilities Commission, along with its sister agency, the California Energy Commission, has the fundamental responsibilities for trying to make sure that the state gets to that 33% renewable goal that Marcie Edwards just mentioned. So I'm sure that we'll have some good discussion on this very topic of how to do it and how large-scale renewables fit into this, as well as distributed generation.
Hi, I'm Stephen Mullennix from U.S. Renewables Group. I'm the managing director there. U.S. Renewables Group is an investment fund dedicated to investing exclusively in renewable energy. And we do that both in electricity generation as well as fuels. On the electricity side, we've made investments really across the spectrum in solar, wind, biomass, geothermal, and a number of others, including some storage technologies and others. The stage of company that we invest in, we don't typically invest in sort of new equipment. We invest in developers or developments. So we're more on the implementation side when it's time to fund the development and then construction of a very large utility scale system. That's where we step in with the equity. We have deep relationships with debt as well. So that's really where we participate. We have about $750 million under management across 3 funds, and we invest primarily in the United States.
Good afternoon. I'm Guy Blanchard, Vice President of Business Development at Amonix. Amonix is a Seal Beach-based concentrated photovoltaic equipment manufacturer. CPV is photovoltaics, only better in hot and sunny areas. We have about 40 megawatts being installed this year, most of it outside of California. And we have our headquarters in Seal Beach and some manufacturing here in California as well. We work with our developers and also through our own development services group on projects here in California. So we are very interested in having the RPS be implemented in a way that allows for very good technologies like ours to get its fair share of development here in California.
My name is Tim Olson. I'm a policy advisor for the California Energy Commission. Originally, Commissioner Jim Boyd was going to be here, and apologizes for not attending. He had to undergo a medical procedure that he couldn't postpone, so hopefully I can fill the shoes.
Gentlemen, thank you all very much. With that, I'd like to start with a question that we hear quite a bit from a variety of people across the spectrum in the renewable industry, and that is we all hear the cry for regulatory certainty. Particularly, we hear it from the investment side. But do you think regulatory ambiguity constitutes the most significant challenge? And if it does, I'd like to hear why. And if you think other things actually take precedence, we'd be interested in hearing that as well. I'd like to start with Mr. Peevey.
Well, first place, there's no such thing as absolute certainty in life, I suppose, except for death. I used to think taxes, but along came the Tea Party. Got a little levity here in the afternoon to keep you awake. That's only the start. No, I don't think that regulation and it's it has in California. I think we have a reasonably high degree of certainty to it. There are aspects that are not perfect in that regard, but we wouldn't have like 80,000 megawatts of all kinds of generation renewables proposed that want to be in the Cal ISO queue and all that if there were regulatory uncertainty and it loomed that large for investors. But I will readily concede there is some, particularly on the renewal of certain kinds of programs. But I'll let the two people to my right speak, since they are the developers themselves, to this topic, and then maybe I'll come back and make some joke at their expense.
We make jokes at your expense. That's good.
You usually do, so that won't be anything new.
I would just add that, look, uncertainty of any kind is what you're trying to price as an investor. There are some regulatory uncertainties. You know, the one that's the hot topic right now is the implementation of the 33% RPS. There are a lot of questions there. Will enforcement be stringent enough that the utilities will sort of play the way is intended, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure everyone in this room is very aware of those. What's interesting is that you have political uncertainties sitting at sort of the top, if you will. Then that permutates through regulatory uncertainty. And sort of on the other side of the scale is you have economic uncertainties. You have, in some ways, a very good uncertainty, which is you have prices of a lot of these technologies sort of plummeting, which is fantastic. But, you know, how far is it going to go? How do you price today for a project that will be implemented in 2 years? So you have economic uncertainties sort of overlaying the other political and regulatory uncertainties. The combination of all those, I can tell you as an investor, is proving pretty daunting. And what that means is sort of that all gets reflected in cost of capital. And when you have a high cost of capital, but you're selling into a very competitive commodity market, you know, what that means is you're really threading a needle to get a project financed today. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a challenge for developers, it's a challenge for financiers, and it's a challenge sort of up and down the value chain.
Thanks. You know, development is wrought with risk. It's getting into it over the last few years. You know, if you knew what you were getting into going in, you might choose not to even do it. For a project to come together and work, it's got to have a technology that works. Thankfully, we can help there. You need capital, reasonably priced capital that's available when the project is scheduled to start building, and then take out financing for it to stay in place. You need permitting. You need interconnection. You need a functioning power market with PPAs or off-takers that work. And the last three things I mentioned are all regulatory and legislative issues that people at this table have to deal with every day. So is the uncertainty created around regulatory important? Absolutely it is. And fortunately, it's both a problem and an opportunity to do things right, an opportunity to put together markets that work and help California achieve its RPS goals. So here in the coming year, we're going to have the RAM. It's been resolved and it's being put in place. No one knows yet how the implementation of the 33% RPS will come together. That'll be very important to everyone involved in industry here in California. And kind of at more down in the weeds, the agencies here deal with issues that are important to us all the time, working through interconnect issues. You have WBAT, Rule 21 being worked on right now and coming to resolution. And timely resolution of all of the risks that developers face is absolutely mandatory for a successful project.
There are a couple factors that we asked what has changed, what are the factors that influence the licensing, the permitting. In the last year and a half, we've gone from licensing, the Energy Commission licenses thermal power plants that historically been mostly natural gas combined cycle, 25-acre footprints, and our licensing is an environmental review, equivalent of an EIR. Issues tended to be in urban areas, these projects in urban areas, maybe some water impacts, local land use. In the last solar projects have been approved, all solar thermal. Footprints are 4,000 to 7,000 acres. The impacts are different. They're biological. So in one sense, we're kind of shifting midstream to look at things that historically we haven't had to look at. And so that's one factor. And then the other projects that are not thermal, so the solar PV, wind projects, that permitting process is a local government process right now. And the ability of counties to do that process varies from location to location. So there are definitely some issues to work with, challenges regarding kind of the shift in the nature of the projects out there.
I just wanted to add something to what was just said. In the last year, in 2010, in the last year of the Schwarzenegger administration, I think it's fair to say that there was a tremendous push on the Energy Commission to approve just about every single solar thermal project that was before it for permitting. And it did so. That's the reality. So is that regulatory uncertainty? If I was a developer, I'd be quite pleased with that. The California Public Utilities Commission has permitted, not without a lot of controversy in certain instances, every major transmission line that's come before the California Public Utilities Commission. Whether it's the line from San Diego to Arizona, the Southwest Power Link, which has been in operation, wouldn't have had the failure last week probably. The Tehachapi line, which is very, very controversial in aspects of it, that brings wind power out of the area north of Los Angeles. The Ivanpah to, I can't remember the junction point, transmission line, and several smaller transmission projects, every single one of those. So is that regulatory uncertainty? I don't think so. I think the state has created an environment at the permitting agencies where you can fund projects and develop them. I do think financing is a tremendous challenge, and I think there are other challenges too, but financing is certainly the greatest one, and as the two speakers to my right have said, it's difficult to do. But you always expect developers to bitch and moan about the quality of government. Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it isn't. We don't have a uniformly bad government in California. I think that would be a stretch to say it's uniformly good, but it certainly has been in this area trying very hard over the last several years. And we closed out the last decade, the end of 2010. The goal was 20% renewables. We didn't quite make it, but Edison came in at 19.7%. So that's pretty damn high. And PG&E was more like 17%, and San Diego was significantly lower than that. Those are the three big IOUs. None of the municipal utilities came anywhere close to this, although they claim they did, particularly DW, Los Angeles Department of Water Power, except for SMUD, I believe. I don't know, Marcie can speak to Anaheim, but except for SMUD, which did come in at those numbers. And those numbers that I just rattled off does not include the California Solar Initiative, where we've installed 600-700 megawatts now of rooftop solar on commercial, government, and residential buildings all over the state. The program is very much subscribed to, or a couple of other smaller renewable programs. So this state is moving in the direction. The big choice now is how much of this is going to be central station solar, which Marcie just asked us about, versus distributed generation, rooftop solar, more stuff closer to your home, your business, your neighborhood. In the future, the Governor Brown said he wants to see 12,000 megawatts of distributed generation by the end of the decade. That is a significant challenge, although we do have programs underway to try to help to meet that goal, which I think is achievable, but it'll be Herculean to achieve it.
Thank you, Mike. I think there is certainly among some members of the panel a general agreement that the regulatory agencies are often pitched as the stumbling block or what causes the process to slow down and become more complex. And I would argue that frequently it is the more subjective interpretation of the benefits, burdens, and costs associated with the individual projects that creates that greater focus. Or it's also the more simplistic of, if you're invested in this solar technology, you prefer that over this particular solar technology or wind. There's a tremendous amount of internal reprioritization that the regulatory agencies have to deal with. I think Mike's point that there are a number of projects in the queue stands, however, as mute evidence of the fact that the process does indeed work, and it is becoming more and more refined every day. As far as the shot on munis, I'm going to let it go because I'm a moderator, but be careful. And speaking to, that wasn't a pass, are you kidding? Speaking of, another question with respect to the role of the regulatory agencies as a group, given the rapid onset of both technological obsolescence of the varying renewable technologies, as well as the complexities of all of the agencies playing, not just the host utilities, but the people owning the technology, those funding it, those who have other parallel or contradictory interests in all of this. How is the true lead agency defined or clarified when you're talking about the strategic evaluation of renewable portfolio? Does the market need to work with the PUC and the CEC and the legislative platform and the ISO all at one time? Or is there some sort of process or single group they can look to try to streamline and clarify their way through? Mike?
Well, thank you very much, Marcie, for choosing me twice in a row to lead us up. Very thoughtful of you. You said you weren't going to get back at me, but at any rate, I think you have to work with pretty much all. This is a very complicated. This whole area is, there are many, many players and institutions involved in addition to investors. I mean, we have, at the state level, we have goals, and the Energy Commission, the Public Utilities Commission, work pretty carefully and closely together in achievement of those goals. We have something called an energy action plan that articulates the state views. It sets forth energy efficiency as first priority, and then renewables as the second priority, and transmission and distributed generation and so forth. But we also have the legislature very much in this mix, and I'll come back to them in a second. And so is the California Air Resources Board, because we have a goal of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. This is law in California. This is not something that was not achievable at the federal level. We have it by law in the state of California that by 2050, 39 years from now, that greenhouse gas emissions have to be 80% lower than they are today, or they were at the 1990 level. That's a Herculean task. Is it achievable? I don't think anybody in this room can tell you for sure if it is right now, but that is a policy goal that we have set. And all of this, and that produces things like ultimately a cap and trade program for the state of California, which we're slated to do come 2013, and so forth. So we have this multiplicity of goals, and if I was in the investment committee trying to sort through all this would be a difficult challenge, and I would concentrate probably on one or two agencies like the PUC and the Energy Commission. I said I'd get back to the legislature. The legislature just recessed for this year, Friday night, I think like 2 a.m. Saturday morning. It refused to continue the public goods charge, which is on everybody's utility bill, to invest in things like energy research and climate change and other things. And the governor was not able to work out an accommodation to get two votes short in the state Senate. On the other hand, it did extend the self-generation incentive program, which is a stimulus program for technologies such as fuel cells and all. So all of these things go into this mix of public policy and regulatory certainty or uncertainty, and it becomes a rather jumbled and complicated mixture, very frankly.
perspective, I think you just heard that it's incredibly complex. Now, on the one hand, as an investment management firm such as ourselves, we look at that complexity and say, okay, well, we can go really understand that complexity, we can understand it, and thereby we can create opportunity for ourselves to manage investor money, to put forth in this space because we can understand it and other people aren't going to take the time to do that. So in one respect, that's good. However, we in turn have to raise money from limited partners, and those limited partners are state pension plans, large company pension plans, both in the U.S. and abroad. They're allocating their funds on behalf of their pensioners or whoever they're benefiting, based on a huge set. I mean, they could buy gold, they could buy treasuries, they could buy this, they could buy that, or they could invest in a very specialized niche called renewable energy. The heavier the complexity burden gets, the less likely those folks are going to say, you know what, that's a safe place for my money. I can really see some growth there. And that really jams up the whole system. And frankly, just like Michael said, in order to get your project through, you have to manage all of those resources, and that's kind of what you do as a VP of development. I mean, this is what developers do. But when the outside perspective is that, wow, there really isn't a framework, or there really isn't a path, capital goes somewhere else. And that's just a reality that I think we're kind of living with. So, the more there's clarity on implementation of 33%, when you go see the PGC fail, that says something to the people allocating their money. So these complexities are real and they do have an impact.
So California is such a big market, everyone wants to be in it, but I'll add to the agencies that haven't been brought up. I mean, we deal with, and our customers deal with, everyone mentioned, Department of Fish and Game, the FAA, possibly BLM, U.S. Forest Service, city and county agencies. And all of these different stakeholders in the process all have an ability to slow things down, to say no, to clock things up. We have to go through all of those. It's just the cost of doing business in California. If this was a niche state, I'd probably have a tough time getting renewable developers to come here. But this is the big market in the West. So I think it's right that it probably reflects itself in in cost of capital, and that is in the additional time it takes for projects to get permitted and get through the process here in California. In neighboring states, our developers have managed to start and get projects from a twinkle in the eye to having equipment going into the ground in under a year. California, it can take years, half a decade or more to get a project from conception to actual installation. And I think that focusing on ways that time can be brought in, that the certainty along the process can be brought in, benefits the renewable industry here in California.
I agree with President Peevey's comment that there's a need for multiple agencies just because of the complexity. Cal ISO is another player in this. And the range of things are grid security, meeting the 33% goal, affordability of electricity, environmental review projects. And the location of the grid-connected renewables, utility scale, tend to be remote spots, as I mentioned before. So, and some of those areas are federal land that in the past have not been part of any California planning or any kind of certification process, but now are compelled to be part of that. Our work there is to form this federal, state, and in many cases local, regional planning, the so-called Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan is meant to be kind of an overall programmatic environmental review, identifying where you can build projects and where you shouldn't. And that's intended to provide some certainty and avoid extenuous environmental reviews and potential lawsuits. So we think that there's some things that are working. And as it becomes more complex, there are going to be more parties involved in this. We need to get this in a very defined time frame to provide that transparency and describe that process for everybody.
All right, so far we're in vehement agreement that it's a very complex process and everyone's doing arguably the best they can. The problem becomes, particularly in California, and for those of you who listen to the lunchtime speaker, affecting some sense of balance, and there's always the push for balance, both legislatively and in the regulatory environment. That means encompassing how many agendas and to what extent. And wherever there is a line drawn, there's going to be people on both sides of it. And so to that end, frankly, it serves kind of a broader good to support the actions of the regulatory agencies because it gives them enough of a power base to try to drive toward certainty, as opposed to take a step backwards into a level of ambiguity such that the process does take longer. Because I can promise you there is no end to the variables that need to be integrated in all of this going forward. And I don't see, frankly, that shrinking. I think that complexity is going to steadily mount as we move forward. Even from the standpoint of a small municipally owned agency, the complexities associated with renewables is a very in-depth one. We need to keep the price point down because to continue to raise the price of electricity is going to cause our customers to relocate at an even greater rate. That having been said, however, when we finance it and use 20 and 30-year money for these finances, that technology is going to be totally different in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15. So the determination whether to make those investments is challenging, whether you're a municipal, whether you're an investor-owned utility, where you're on the side of trying to create some certainty over time. I think some of these things are not going to reach a point of certainty, and to create opportunities for us to be able to hedge against the technological obsolescence issues, to hedge against the change in the regulatory structure, in the environmental priorities. I think that, frankly, is going to be key, but again, that can be most difficult. There was some mention earlier of distributed generation, and we have a question on how can distributed generation be best encouraged to move forward given the challenges it creates for utilities. I thought very briefly, for those of you who are more segmented players in this market, I will touch on the fact that distributed generation for utilities is quite a challenge. There is the expectation that the moment that distributed generation source goes away, that the host or the pre-existing utility, whoever service territory that's in, step up at a moment's notice to replace that generation. There is also the issues associated of how big do the pipes have to necessarily be to provide that backstop capability, and then all the associated who pays arguments. So given that distributed generation will in fact play a larger and larger role in meeting the RPS goals, I'm curious from the panel as far as how do they see meeting some of the challenges that utilities see about rapidly increasing the amount of distributed generation. I've been going in an order, Mike, so you just might as well take it now.
Well, we are, as I said earlier, the governor has a goal of 12,000 megawatts of distributed generation by the end of the decade. It's very difficult to see how that's going to happen given some of these hurdles that Marcie just mentioned. But to the extent that we can at the Public Utilities Commission, we will do our darndest to make sure that the utilities we regulate overcome those hurdles as advantageously as they can in terms of impacts upon their customers. We have a bunch of programs in the distributed generation space that are either in existence or growing. I'll just mention a couple. We have a feed-in tariff program now for projects up to 1.5 megawatts. We have over 40 megawatts now signed up for that program under a bill called Senate Bill 32, feed-in tariff for projects up to 3 megawatts, and we expect to have a decision from the PUC at the end of this year. We've gone to this reverse renewable auction mechanism as a substitute for feed-in tariffs for projects up to 20 megawatts, which is very attractive, I think, to a couple of potential investors here. And this would provide standard contracts under competitive bidding. We expect the first of these auctions to occur in November this year under our auspices. We're looking for 750 megawatts ultimately of new generation under that program. These things can come forward and make a significant dent in this distributed generation program. In addition, the Public Utilities Commission some time ago, last couple of years, adopted programs for rooftop solar on and ground-mounted solar on buildings under the auspices of the investor-owned utilities. Edison started out wanting to do commercial rooftops. Now they're talking more about ground-mounted. Same with PG&E and San Diego. We're talking about 1,100 megawatts there. You start adding these pieces up, and you can see where you could make significant progress in thousands of megawatts of new distributed generation that avoids the big transmission challenges, but does face the challenges that Ms. Edwards referred to for the utility, particularly one the size of Anaheim, trying to manage all this and have the backup power of the gas generation necessary is a complicated and can be a costly operation.
I'm the wrong guy to ask because we very specifically invest in utility scale and not distributed scale. Frankly, we don't believe in a lot of the distributed scale models. You've heard of all the challenges you have to go through to get a project done, and while the challenges may be smaller for a distributed scale project, you don't have to run 60 miles of new transmission, there's still just an immense amount of hurdles that you have to overcome. The only way to hit a price point that makes sense there is if you have an incredibly efficient process where you can do half a megawatt at a time, 250 kW at a time. I don't really believe that exists. And you're going to spend more in legal fees to get each one of those projects documented than it even makes sense. So I'm really the wrong person to ask. I think there's huge inefficiencies of scale at the distributed, and I don't think it's the best technical solution. I'd much rather be focusing and having all the regulatory agencies and all the other players focusing on doing 150 megawatts of solar with storage, that is a 24/7 baseload type of product. I think that just makes a lot more sense. So I'm the wrong person to ask.
The right person with the wrong opinion on it. So when we think of this distributed generation market, we think of the wholesale distributed generation market, which is really 20 megawatts and less, which matches very well with the programs that are coming down. And that size project has an incredibly good place in California's grid. For one thing, the projects can get done. They can get done more quickly, they can get financed more easily, and the barriers to getting completed are far less. They use a lot less land. The land can often be brownfield sites. It can be reclaimed land from other uses. Amonix has a project going in on a previously mined quarry, for example. And the permitting process on that land was incredibly fast and easy. It was within a zoning that already accommodated putting power plants. So the whole process of going through permitting is much easier. There's plenty of points on the grid around here in Southern California where distributed generation can be injected with no network upgrades, with no new power lines at all. And those are abundant places that actually have the distributed generation project support the grid, not be a problem for the grid. And just going to the problem of needing balance and making sure that there's reliability in the system so there's electricity to turn the lights on when you want it. By nature, having a more granular approach adds reliability to the system. It makes a single point of failure far less impactful to the grid, because a failure is extremely unlikely to happen simultaneously. So if a plant goes down, it doesn't meaningfully hurt things. So it's faster, it's easier to finance, and it saves costs by having the transmission needs largely go away.
I might fine-tune my opinion just as I'm thinking about it. We think utility scale as sort of 5 megawatts and up, and I really think of distributed sort of sub 1 megawatt, and that's where I think there's a tougher thing. I think sort of in that 5 to 20 range, there are a number of projects. That's still a big project. I mean, when you go out to a 10 megawatt PV or CPD site, that's a real project.
Well, you can't think of anything more dramatic than what happened in San Diego the end of last week. And that was because of what human error at North Yuma. One or two people, and all San Diego was blacked out, and it triggered San Onofre, so both units shut down. If you know, the idea that significant distributed generation could reduce that, or at least reduced it by in particular locales, I think is quite accurate. And when we say distributed generation, we do talk about, we are talking about 20 megawatts and less. We're not talking about 5 kW.
The Energy Commission is committed to continuing that relationship with the Public Utilities Commission. It's worked well, determining the eligibility, just a lot of data sharing on where the project's going to be, and the fact that there's a significant incentive to send a signal to investors, just on the incentives alone. We see a potential challenge with local government permitting. And it really comes down to the resources, not capabilities, but the resources to carry out the permitting to get to that 12,000 megawatt number. And there may be an analog there. Recent Energy Commission and the Public Utilities Commission have been jointly trying to stimulate electric vehicle chargers, some in home, some in the marketplace. And the same thing is occurring there. As electric vehicles come in the market, need for more chargers, it's a local government permit. Should be pretty simple, but it varies from 58 different counties throughout the state. And so one of the ways we're handling that is infusion of some cash to the local government for basically standardizing permitting, getting them to interact regionally so that there's some consistency across the state. That could be an analog for some of the smaller scale renewables.
It's interesting from the standpoint of chargers in particular. And you know, present I play a dual role. I not only work for the utility, but I have an interim job within the actual city of Anaheim in the permitting department as well. It's fascinating because what they view as a complexity is simply enough people and process to be able to address it. And yet, from a utility perspective, the proliferation of distributed generation, the discussion of charging stations and size, and the ubiquitous aspect of it, there are these predefined, but there are tipping points within this. It's not a problem here, it can be a massive problem here, or in this particular locale, or in this geography. And how do you integrate those challenges into a permitting process to where all parties necessarily have the same opportunity to enjoin and proliferate their particular technology? As we look at some of the charging station options, one of the larger barriers is the depth and readiness of the actual local grid systems within what we call the distribution network in power systems. The distribution networks weren't even ready for the advent of plasma screen TVs, for God's sake. You see in the summer, we have small scale, and this, by the way, is not simply Anaheim. I'm talking on more of a macro utility perspective, but the transformers are going when you have these real peaky hot days. So you start plugging in a lot of home chargers and city-owned chargers and chargers at businesses, and you rapidly run up against these who pays roadblocks. And should the cost to remediate this be borne by the ratepayers of that utility? Should it be borne by that market segment? Should it be subsidized by government? So to the extent we know more about the challenges, the costs, the benefits and burdens of each of these, and have a dialogue on how to apportion it, I think that kind of benefits moving us all forward as a group. Let's see. Here's an interesting one, and I'm not sure this is actually a price point question or a jobs question. For those of you that were here for the lunchtime speaker, it might be interesting. Utility scale renewable projects create great demand for costly materials such as photovoltaic panels, wind turbines, etc. What is California doing to encourage project developers to procure such materials that are manufactured in California and the United States? Realistically, what can California do to ensure the jobs associated with manufacturing these materials remain in California, and yet, and this part's important, still obtain a price point that keeps California electricity from being the most expensive in the nation? Look at Mike. Please get someone else to answer this. Go ahead.
Couldn't even begin to answer that. Honestly, I don't think that's realistic, frankly, to procure everything in California and then ask for sort of a global, low-cost product. I just don't think that's realistic. We can agree. Can the U.S. do that?
And
Forget California.
I actually would agree with you, but when we address this in a bifurcated fashion, the people whose interests are jobs focus on that. You see pieces of legislation that say that electrons turn color at the California border and are suddenly subject to a whole different rules paradigm. So I think that, as much as anything else, chills the investment community and makes it more challenging to try to get things done, is this proliferation of every single interest and we pour them all in the bucket. I'd like to keep jobs in our state and nation as well as everyone else would, but trying to do it consistent with a price point, when you look at the price of energy on a national basis, becomes a real challenge. I know it's not so much the interest of the investment community, but it's a barrier to moving things forward more rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you look, you can't have it both ways, and we all can't have it both ways. We like our energy incredibly cheap. We like our water for nearly free. We like all of that. You can't have that and have everything in California. So it's a real question. I mean, I agree. We've frankly, with a biomass plant, which is very local labor intensive, we tried to raise. Look, these are real California jobs in the San Joaquin Valley, and this really means something. And it's like means kind of nothing at the end of the day. So I agree. When we just fought that battle, and it really falls on deaf ears. But you can't expect anyone to pick that up and price that in today, because there is no framework to do that. If that were priced into a framework, people would react. Until then, don't expect people to react, because we love California so much as I do.
So Amonix has about 300 employees in California going to work every day right now. We have about 160 people in Seal Beach, our headquarters. Those are mostly highly skilled jobs, engineers that might be tough to really get in a single place, any place in the country other than maybe California and a couple other states. We have the high-tech piece of our product, the semiconductor piece. We've made in Milpitas at a factory there with our manufacturing partner Flextronics. That's where SunPower makes their modules in the U.S. as well. So I think when we think about jobs, we have to think about what can California be competitive at, and where can we have a sustainable competitive advantage. And in these areas of using our resources, using our engineering, our semiconductor in Southern California, the aerospace and defense heritage, gives California a great leg up on newer solar technologies. Now, unfortunately, the battle has been lost on crystalline silicon technologies, which is the dominant technology in photovoltaics today. Those come out of China, where the Chinese government has massively subsidized manufacturing, has created a market that is not competitive. It's not fair. It certainly is competitive, where materials are being sold at prices that no one else in the world can even touch. And we can't go chase that. That is gone. But here we have newer technologies, and innovation continues to come out of California and can continue to remain here. California does have a stubbornly high unemployment rate, and I will say Amonix last year was looking at where to put its manufacturing facility, and we chose Las Vegas, Nevada for that. Labor is a lot less. The state had a very good incentive package for us and encouraged us to come, and it was just much more challenging, and it was not as cost effective to locate those manufacturing jobs in California. So I think playing to our strengths is the key to success.
Energy Commission conducted a hearing about 6 months ago. It was basically on this topic, and economists ranging from UCLA, Beacon, our own Department of Finance, Federal Reserve Bank, all concluded that California is the proving ground for technology. It's the innovation center. It's the R&D capital. It's the venture capital, dominates venture capital investment. And for startup technologies, it is really the place to be. Once that technology gets in the mass market, the manufacturing shifts overseas. That was their conclusion. That's not going to change. So one thing you learn from that is the middle class manufacturing jobs are not going to be here. And I guess we're questioning whether that can change. And part of this factor is, some of the panel members have mentioned already, having worked internationally for about 15 years in China, India, almost every developing country, other countries have industrial policies to design how they want to create their economy, how they want to encourage manufacturing, and they're in essence selling to the developed countries of the world. We think that there are some ways that we can offset some of that, and we need a better balance. It's not just 100% California-made product, but we need a better balance of jobs in California and affordable products for us. And I understand and agree with the concept of globalization, but there's some things we can do here, and that's a couple things that are already on the books. One, California has this SB 71 sales tax exemption for California clean tech manufacturing. It basically exempts sales tax. Now, it basically evens the level field that other states have right now. We have this odd situation where we had a double tax. That process, every manufacturer here should take advantage of that. In addition, we should listen to, I can't remember who said it this morning, do what Mississippi does. Their government assigns individuals to help individual companies either recruit, stay in their state, or expand. And that facilitation is a good combination of a lot of different entities. In California, in this area, could be a combination of our energy agencies that are investing money in incentives. It could include the state treasurer's office that manages that manufacturing program. It could include Clean Tech OC as a facilitator. This is a team that has to happen. In addition, what we could do is engage those manufacturers that we know are providing product to California and maybe primarily offshore, and talk to them informally about what are they doing for California manufacturing jobs here. And that's worked in several cases where we have done those informal meetings. And we're not going to ban any outside product. That's a violation of the Interstate Commerce Act. But there's some things that can offset and enhance what we see as a better balance.
Let me just say one word here. The legislature, and the governor are now talking about we got to create more jobs in California because of this high unemployment rate that was mentioned. And maybe there's an analogy here regarding California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. A lot of complaints about CEQA over the years that it's used to unduly delay projects. We've all heard this again and again and again. So Phil Anschultz and AEG Corporation talking about they want to build a privately funded stadium in downtown Los Angeles, right? Everybody's followed this in the newspaper. And $1 billion investment to put a brand new stadium, would be called Farmers Field. But they want to have some certainty. They've been asking the legislature and the government, we want some certainty that we can go ahead with this project. So the legislature passed at the end of last week a bill limiting any appeals under CEQA to 175 days. And AEG said they'll go ahead with the project now if the governor signs the bill. Maybe this could apply to some other large-scale projects. There are It has to be a certain size, has to be environmentally friendly, or at least get a waiver that it's not environmentally negative, and there's other pieces of the statute that I'm not personally familiar with. But it does show a willingness to move and think out of the box, and maybe a lot of this is applicable to some of the things we're talking about here.
If I may, one more quick comment here. So, mentioned some of the programs. Amonix has been a recipient of the sales tax exemption under CAPE fund, and we're very happy with that program. That's been the one program that's worked for us. The difference in cost for us isn't much. It's a tiny bit. But this is a brutally competitive market, and we want to have the most competitive product we can. So if there are policies that encourage in any way the California aspect, Amonix as a company would love to have a factory here. We'd love to have a flame assembly here. Bring economic development to the communities that are using or developing our projects. And interstate commerce is, of course, a difficult area to get around, but it's just valuing California content in some way in project selection. Or sit and talk about many other ways, but it's a nudge that's needed. It's not a big chasm here.
I might add, so that I don't come off sounding too bearish, there was a very great report by, I believe it was Bain, could have been McKinsey, I'm sorry if I'm getting it wrong, I think it was Bain, but it really looked into Chinese-based manufacturing across a suite of products, and I don't know if they specifically looked at photovoltaic or not, but the conclusion of the report is that by 2015, a lot of the hard advantages that China has had are evening to the point where it won't be such an advantage, and a lot of manufacturing will start coming back to the U.S. Because when you're getting your land for free, you can't go lower than that. When you're paying people nothing, you can't go lower than that. When you're getting 0% money from the bank, you can't go lower than that. So sort of those are reaching a natural end, a lot of those advantages. And so the conclusion of the report, and it was actually a great one to go find on the web, is that starting 2015, those advantages will start pushing manufacturing back to certain areas of the U.S. They did not cite California.
Interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, we wanted to leave a few moments on the agenda in case any of you had questions for any members of the panel. Anything spark your interest in this discussion that you wanted to either follow up on or ask a question in another area that some of these individuals may have some additional depth in? All right. This is what happens when you get the after lunch crowd. Busy digesting. All right, Greg, I think we're there.
All right, well, join me in thanking the panel, please. Okay, well, thank you, Marcie. Thank you, the rest of the panelists. We're going to go ahead and actually move to our next panel without a break and try to keep things on schedule this afternoon. So I'm going to go ahead and invite the fifth panel up onto stage, and we'll see if we can do an orderly transition of power here.